Welcome to the Survivor Fans Podcast. I'm Joanne.
And I'm Stacy. We're here with Michelle from Survivor Millennials versus Gen X.
All right.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for speaking with us today.
Yeah, for sure. How are you?
Good. Tell us how you were chosen to be on Survivor.
Oh, man. Well, let's see. A coworker, Pete, turned to me about a little over a year ago, and started talking to me and saying, Michelle, have you ever thought about being on Survivor? I think you'd be good at it. And he happened to know a casting agent who we then talked to, and he thought I was a great fit and passed my name on to the directors, and that's when I started talking with them. It's, of course, a long interview process, and it was interesting. After every conversation, I felt awful about it. I felt like, well, those were the honest answers. That's who I am. And they didn't seem to like it. I probably won't hear from them again. But then, lo and behold, a couple weeks later, I'd hear from them again. And it kept going, and they ended up liking me enough to put me on the show.
What made you think they didn't like your answers?
I don't know. I didn't think the answers that I gave were what they wanted to hear. A lot of my answers were, kind of related to my faith. If you ask me almost anything, Michelle, why do you live that way? My answer is going to be, well, because I view the world this way. And that has to do with the Bible. That has to do with, Jesus Christ. And I didn't think that's what anybody wanted to hear, but that was just the honest answer. And so I kind of, every time we'd hang up, I'd be like, oh, well, that's what they asked.
Now, had you watched the show before?
Yes. So, surprisingly, I'm not actually your typical millennial. I hadn't watched TV for about 10 or 15 years, a very long time, and wasn't really a movie person either. I'm not disconnected from pop culture, but definitely not, into it. One of the only shows I had seen during that time was Survivor, when, a family member or a friend would come over and say, Michelle, you got to watch this episode with me. Like, all right. And it was always an interesting show to me. But when I started the process of heading towards Survivor, I binge-watched at least, 16 seasons start to finish, and loved it. I was fascinated at this, social play that was going on before you with, the idea that you cannot be anybody's best friend and you cannot be anybody's worst enemy. You have to find a line that people like you and people want to work with you, but not too much. And so, yeah, it was fascinating to me. I really felt like I would enjoy being a part of it.
Did you do anything else to prepare besides the binge watching?
Oh, yeah. I, of course, worked out a lot more. I would go to the pool and practice swimming and practice diving down and untying knots and stuff like that. Maybe read up on a little bit of psychology and, that sort of thing. Just kind of tried to prepare in that way. And then, of course, spiritual preparation. I knew I wouldn't have a Bible for a while, so I memorized some large chunks of scripture. I knew I wouldn't have, I wondered, I might not have anybody to pray with or talk with about the things that are most important to me, so I'm going to have a lot of people praying for me. I'm going to, I try to take preparations for each aspect of the game, emotional, physical, and mental.
So who were you planning to have in your alliance after the merge?
I was pretty flexible, though I knew from my vanilla experience that I was not going to have much luck with Chris, David, or Zeke. I had hopes maybe to work with Zeke, but maybe not expectations. But really, I feel like those were the only ones that I felt like I couldn't work with, or I had a very small chance of working with. Everybody else I felt pretty good about.
What was your reaction when you saw that Michaela was gone, and how did that affect your game?
That was not terrible. When I saw the two boats coming up to merge, I was, of course, scanning them, trying to find out who was voted out last night. Was it Brett or Sunday? And I see Brett. I'm like, it wasn't Brett. It must have been Sunday. But then I see Sunday, and I'm thinking, what? Brett and Sunday are there. Who'd they vote out? And then I see Jay, and I'm like, whew, okay. My closest alliance is still there. And then, of course, it was Michaela. And so when Jay gets to the beach, as soon as we had time to talk, he said, Michelle, she was throwing out your name, and she was throwing out you and Taylor's name really early to boot after the merge. I couldn't let it happen. I flipped the vote and got her out. And so I was thankful. Michaela was a cool girl, and Jay and I wanted to work with her post-merge, but of of course, as things were unfolding, it became clear that maybe that wasn't the best avenue. So I was actually grateful. I thought that was a good move.
Let's circle back to Chris, David, and Zeke. We were hoping you could give us a little more insight into their gameplay. Can you give us just a short description of Chris and what you thought of him?
Chris is a meat and potatoes kind of guy. There's no messing around. There's no fooling around. You just give it to him straight. He wants the facts, however big or small they are. That's Chris, and he'll tell you straight, and you can tell when he doesn't like you. And I can tell. That was Chris.
What about David?
David was different. David was more like, or at least this is how I felt. I felt like David was more of a skittish horse or something. You can't just come out with all the facts right away. You gotta come up a little, little by little, gain trust little by little, feed him a little by little, and then eventually you can say, okay, now let's put the bridle in. And I had been trying to do that at grooming since day one on Vanilla and was making very little progress. But yeah.
And Zeke?
Zeke is hilarious and charming. He's just a funny guy. He's easy to get along with and easy to love, but I didn't trust him. There was something in me, and it wasn't even like from me. It was more of this, like, I don't think he trusts me, which of course then I found out he didn't. So that was kind of an interesting little group I was in for that tribe swap. Very unfortunate.
So who came up with the tribe name Vinaka, and what does it mean?
Vinaka means thank you in Fijian. There were a lot of names thrown out, and I think people wanted to go with a Fijian name. I had learned a little bit of Fijian words before going out there. Everyone was a little bit suspicious. Of course, if you've seen other seasons, you know that if you choose anything that only one person knows the meaning of, it's probably not what they say it means. Mm-hmm. So I think everyone was a little suspicious of any names being thrown out that weren't what we knew. But we all knew, or maybe not all of us, but at least half of us knew that Vinaka meant thank you in Fijian. We had maybe heard it on the plane or something on the way in. When you're leaving, they say Vinaka, So yeah, we all thought, we're all thankful to be out here. Let's name our tribe thank you.
Who painted the picture on the flag?
I wrote the letters, and then I believe it was Jessica who painted the picture.
Was your shelter big enough to hold all of you?
No. Well, if we wanted to squeeze in like sardines, we could have, maybe. It would have been very tight. No, never mind. It wouldn't have worked. But that was okay, because actually most of us slept on the ground anyway. We had brought up sand from the beach, because there was actually mud around our camp. And we brought up sand from the beach and spread it out all over, pretty thick layer of sand, so that we could sleep on it around the campfire. And that was definitely the warmest option, and the option that ended up being what most of us chose.
We got to see you strategizing a lot on the early millennial tribe, but we didn't get to see much of you in action after that. Were you confident of the numbers, or was something else going on?
Well, that in that first millennial tribe, I do wish you could have even seen more, because I really do feel that I was able to run the whole thing. I could have, I think, switched the vote almost any direction I wanted to that second episode. And then the tribe swap happened, and of course I feel like I kind of just got the short stick there, because I was on a tribe with, minority of millennials, minority of women, and then not only that, the only other millennial with me was the only one on the millennial tribe that I wasn't close with, and didn't feel like we already had built trust and alliance. And that was a terrible situation. I had to just hang on. I tried daily to make inroads, and I did have a little bit of information I was sitting on, trying to wait for the right time if I needed to scramble. I had a little bit of information that I could try to use to separate Chris and David. But I mean, at the end of the day, I felt like the unclean leper outside the city walls that no one would talk with or align with. It was a stark difference between the way everybody related to each other versus how they related with me on that tribe. So I didn't have much opportunity to strategize. And then come the merge, I purposely went silent, and that was my downfall. I did think that I could remove the target from my back by sitting back for one vote, but that actually just isolated me from anybody that thought we could work together.
What did you have on Chris and David?
Well, the very first day, probably the very first hour that we were on the Vanua beach, Chris comes to me and says, "Hey, Michelle, last night David blindsided the whole group of us. He played an idol for Jessica. After he went around telling everybody he's voting for Jessica, and he sent home Lucy." And, he was very upset about it. He said, "So I've got it in my mind to blindside David. So just keep that in mind if it comes to that." And I was like, perfect. I don't know how serious he is about following through with that because he just sounds really angry right now. But I had this inside info that I would only know if he told me. So if it came to it, I could have gone to David and said, "Hey, he came to me and said this. He came to me and said that you blindsided the whole group last night, that you made a really stupid move," he said. And I could have exploited the whole situation, but you do have to be careful with information like that.
Did you know that Adam, David, or Jay had idols, and did they tell you about the advantage Adam found?
Jay did tell me about the idol that he had. So yeah, I knew that, but I did not know Adam had an idol. I don't think he told anyone about that, and I did not know that David had an idol at this point either. So I didn't know about that advantage.
Did you have any suspicions going into Tribal that your name was going to come up?
Suspicions is a stronger word. I was not comfortable going into Tribal. It was the first vote, as I said in my Ponderosa video, it was the first vote that I wasn't directly involved in the strategizing of. I was not the one looking into people's eyes, debating whether or not they were telling me the truth. I wasn't the one polling people and rallying troops, and I wished I would have been. My gut told me something wasn't right, but my brain told me, no, you got to sit back and trust your alliance. And then during Tribal, I started reading between the lines of what people were saying, and it started to manifest, and I started to say, uh-oh, I think I might be in trouble. But I didn't know enough. I wasn't sure enough to turn to Jay and ask if he would play his idol, which you have to be pretty certain at that point.
Right.
So what criteria will you use to decide who you'll give your vote to? Well,
at this point, I mean, for this vote specifically, I didn't really care. I just said, you guys tell me how to vote. You've told me not to strategize, so I haven't. You just let me know, and I'll do it for this vote.
But for final Tribal, what criteria will you be using to make your decision?
Okay. Well, for me, I like to see real gameplay. I like to see people that were able to use their relationships with others for their own advantage. So I like to see, I guess, a little bit of blood on the hands at the end. But I also want to see, like, a champion who is respectable. And I think you can do both. And I think that's how I'll cast my vote.
What's next for you?
Anything is next for me.
So you're not going back to your job as a missionary recruiter?
Oh, no, I am. That's what I do full time, and I love it. This is exactly, I know that I'm called to be doing this work, and I don't plan to quit this at all. But I'm always up for new experiences, and I welcome them.
Well, Michelle, thank you for sharing with us today, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.